Welcome to Police Academy Prep. This is Deputy Z, and today we will be going through the Law Enforcement Basic Recruit Book of the Police Academy, going into Chapter 2, Communication. Now, before we start, there will no be short version of this chapter because this chapter is generally short. Now, I would like to mention that even though this chapter is short and seems kind of easy, the chapter tests can be quite confusing. I have known people both in my class and in other classes that have failed this chapter expecting it to be easy, thinking they knew the material, they only memorized the bolded terms, and they really got screwed because the chapter is so short, the test maker has to make 50 to 100 questions out of basically nothing. So they basically pull material from almost every sentence in this chapter. So without further ado, we're going to jump in. I'm going to cover the entire chapter here. Should be a shortest video, under 25-30 minutes. So in this chapter, you will learn several communication skills that will make you safer and more effective in your work as a law enforcement officer. Officers who possess strong interpersonal skills can respond appropriately and potentially avoid triggering or escalating a crisis situation. So that could be a test there, possessing strong interpersonal skills. Communication, the definition of communication, involves the exchange of verbal and non-verbal messages. Communication methods include spoken or written language, gestures, facial expressions, and body movements. So those are test questions there, both the definition of communication and the communication methods. For communication to occur, the speaker must send their message in a way that the listener will understand. Then the listener can show that they understand by responding. So those 3 sentences right there were all test questions on my exam. So that's what I'm saying is they tend to they have to pull 50 questions. So they're going to pull from almost every sentence in this chapter. Okay, characteristics of an effective communicator. Law enforcement officers interact with people of many backgrounds, cultures, religious beliefs, and ethnicities. You should be able to adapt your communication style to fit the needs of the people you are interacting with and the situation at hand. So again, you should be able to adapt to the people you are interacting with. Communication barriers, unclear expression, or a failure to understand the other person's needs can all lead to miscommunication. Okay, so test question, what can lead to miscommunication? Unclear expression, communication barriers, or a failure to understand. When miscommunication occurs, it can create problems and potential safety issues for officers. Test question there. Again, miscommunication can create potentially unsafe issues for officers. Good communication skills can help prevent misunderstanding and escalation of tensions, thereby keeping you and the community you serve safe. So what can help prevent misunderstandings and escalations of tensions? Good communication. You can become a more effective communicator by practicing empathy, courtesy, and professionalism. Most likely a test question there. That was for me. So again, practicing empathy, courtesy, and professionalism can make you a more effective communicator. Empathy is the ability to understand and care about the emotions of others. Think of it as a tactic you can use to help in the situations you will encounter as a law enforcement officer. So in my test, there were 2 questions here. 1, the definition of empathy, the ability to understand and care about others. And then there was one saying, what is empathy? Is it a tactic? Is it a strategy? Is it a whatever? And obviously the answer here is empathy is a tactic. So just remember, empathy is a tactic. Okay, so empathy should not be confused with sympathy. So they will have test questions on the difference between the two. Sympathy is feeling sad for somebody. So empathy is understanding and caring for their emotions, and sympathy is feeling sad for someone. Instead, empathy allows you to connect with someone. When you are empathetic, you think about how that person must be feeling and how you would feel in that same situation. So empathy, you put yourself in their situation. Officers can use empathy in any setting to help keep situations safe. For example, you may respond to a call about a person loitering in front of a store. Use empathy to navigate the situation. Consider that this person might be fearful of the police and unsure of the situation. Think back to times where you were afraid or felt unsafe and use these experiences to let this person know that you understand how afraid they might be. So on the test, they will probably have examples. They'll give you a scenario and they'll ask whether or not it's courtesy, empathy, sympathy, and that's when you need to know the difference between all of them. So just remember that empathy is putting yourself in your shoes. So if you see anything about putting yourself in the shoes or how would you feel in that situation, that's empathy. If it's just talking about, you feel sad for them, etc., that is sympathy. So using empathy to put yourself in another person's shoes will help you employ the 4 pillars of procedural justice. If you were in the same situation, you would want to be listened to, treated with respect and fairness, and know what was going on. These behaviors may seem basic, but in a stressful or volatile encounter, empathy can mean the difference between escalating into violence or keeping everyone safe and secure. Test question there. So remember, empathy can be the difference between escalating into violence or keeping everyone safe and secure. Now let's talk about courtesy. Courtesy is how you display professional conduct or show respect for others. The following tips may help you demonstrate courtesy as an officer. So again, courtesy is professional conduct and showing respect. I think further when we get into the material here, you'll see another term that's confusing with courtesy. Just remember, courtesy is professional conduct. Here are some following tips. Be personal yet professional by introducing yourself. Establish rapport. Treat every person you meet with dignity and respect. Avoid words, phrases, and sarcastic tones that may create barriers. An example is using the word obviously when the situation may not be obvious. Or to avoid using you people, which establishes an instant separation between you and the people that you are addressing. When a person's request seems unrealistic, instead of focusing on what cannot be done, redirect the focus to what can be done. And then explain what actions you are taking and why. I would know those. They are possible test questions there. Maintaining a professional, courteous demeanor will help you respond appropriately to situations and can make the public more likely to assist you. Test question here as well. You see how these test questions are seeming more and more similar as I go deeper into the material. So maintaining a professional, courteous demeanor will help you respond appropriately to situations that can make the public more likely to assist you. Okay, then we have professionalism. Professionalism is behavior that demonstrates good character and is marked by pride in yourself and your career. So let's go back to courtesy, right? So courtesy is how you display professional conduct, where professionalism is the behavior that demonstrates good character and is marked by pride in yourself and your career. So a lot of people will see the definition of courtesy, see the word professional, and put professionalism. So that's why I'm saying this test can be tricky if you don't take your time, answer appropriately, and learn these terms inside and out. So again, courtesy is professional conduct and respect. Professionalism is good character and pride in yourself and your career. The characteristics of a professional include service, integrity, respect, quality, fairness, honesty, courage, compassion, moral and ethical leadership, trustworthiness, and common sense. Those can also be on a test question as well. They'll grab a few of them and they'll put them in a test question. Here are some examples of professionalism. Doing the right thing when no one is looking, knowing your job and being competent, dressing professionally, maintaining a calm presence, recognizing and admitting your mistakes, being courteous, practicing customer service, and maintaining your training and continuing education. So I do recall test questions being from these examples. So just remember, if you see any of these types of examples, maintaining training, customer service, admitting mistakes, how you dress, knowing your job, most likely they'll come up and say, hey, what is an example of professionalism? Or they might say on the flip side, maintaining your training and continuing education, example of what? Professionalism, courtesy, positive self-image, and that can be confusing for a lot of people. So know these terms. Be mindful of your attitude and assume one that supports the professional behavior you should display every time you go to work. Your attitude shapes your expectations of what will happen in any given situation, and it affects how people perceive you. So again, your attitude affects how people perceive you. An officer with a professional and positive attitude is a valuable member of society and the law enforcement community. Test question there. Again, officer with professional and positive attitude, valuable member of society. Another way to maintain professional behavior is to practice the 4 pillars of procedural justice and the LEAD framework. So it's possible that they will put more questions on the LEAD framework even though they had it in chapter 1. So it should be fresh in your mind, just keep it updated, which is listen, explain, equity, and dignity. So with the test question, if they do have a question about LEAD framework, it won't be defining what listen, explain, equity, and dignity are. It will just say that what is another way to maintain professional behavior? LEAD framework, positive self-image, being courteous, being empathetic. Technically, all of those, you maintain professional behavior doing all of those, but the correct answer is LEAD framework. So again, another example on why this chapter can be confusing. And I don't want to scare you with this chapter, But I do want to emphasize the point that people underestimate this chapter. They think, oh, 13 pages. I just passed a 50-page chapter, no big deal. What's nice about big chapters is there are 40 terms. So if there's only 50 questions on the test, you can basically guarantee that every term at least is going to be on there once. So then there's only 10 other questions that you have to worry about them pulling from random places. But with a chapter of 13 pages and maybe only 15 bolded terms, now they got to pull 35 questions out of their ass from the examples and the innuendos and the sentences that you're not really expecting questions to come out from. So anyway, let's jump back into this. So remembering the LEAD framework will give you guidelines to follow and make it easier to remain professional in a variety of situations. So they could ask the LEAD framework test question in that frame. They could ask, what gives you guidelines to follow to help maintain professionalism? The LEAD framework. Okay? Now we move on to projecting a positive self-image. An officer's most valuable non-verbal tool is their command presence. So this might sound similar to the one we had above. Let me find it real quick. So remember, projecting a positive self-image is the most valuable tool, where empathy is a tactic. So that will be confusing for some people. I know some people answer that wrong. We had an argument in our class about that one. Until you read the book and see, damn, it's right there, right? So empathy is a tactic, where positive self-image and command presence is a tool. So command presence is a tool and empathy is a tactic. So an officer's most valuable nonverbal tool is their command presence, and it is demonstrated in several ways. To have command presence, you must demonstrate confidence in your demeanor by maintaining a professional personal appearance, erect posture, alertness, and attention to your surroundings. Continued training, education, and experience are all things which can improve your self-confidence, credibility, and command presence. So, again, here comes some more confusingness. Continued training and education improves your command presence, but remember, that was part of the one up here, part of professionalism. Maintaining your training and continued education is an example of professionalism. So, hopefully, the test maker doesn't try to trip you up too much, because he might use those same, or he might use saying, where was I? He might give the example that continued training and education are some things to improve your command presence. What is this a part of? Is it a positive self-image? Is it professionalism? You might have to remember word for word for some of these questions. Displaying a positive self-image extends to every role you play as a law enforcement officer and will vary depending on which role you are serving at the moment. Remember, supporter, stabilizer, or enforcer. For instance, when acting as a supporter, maintain your command presence, but adjust it to fit the situation. Consider sitting down with a victim instead of standing over them when speaking to them. In this way, you are still in control of the situation and conveying ability, but also making the victim more comfortable. Being aware of what role you need to take on will help you determine a suitable professional response for the situation. So, test questions with that section, I would say, know the example of, bending down with a victim. They might use that in the book. How you need to, it might be a question asking how to properly have command presence. It might be a test question to how to deal with a victim. It could be a test question saying, is this a part of positive self-image? Which obviously it is. Now, another possible test question here is, being aware of what role you need to take on will help you determine a suitable professional response for that situation. So what will help you determine a suitable professional response is being aware of what role you need to take on. Project a positive self-image in your physical appearance. So remember, positive self-image is big on physical appearance. So if the test question comes up with positive self-image, it's probably going to have to do with some sort of physical grooming, how you dress, and command presence. It is the first nonverbal message you give upon arriving at a scene. Ding, ding, ding. Test question. What is the first nonverbal message you give upon arriving at the scene? That is a positive self-image and your physical appearance. Again, it is nonverbal. So keep your uniform clean and pressed and your shoes shined. Maintain your personal hygiene, as this demonstrates respect for your job and the people in your community you serve. So that could be a test question. How do you demonstrate respect for your job? Keep your uniform clean, maintain hygiene, shoes shined, etc. Okay, so remember, positive self-image is the first nonverbal message. An officer's most valuable nonverbal tool is their command presence, and empathy is a tactic. So remember those three, because those will be test questions. Okay, verbal and nonverbal cues. The more you understand verbal and nonverbal cues, the greater your ability to communicate and choose responses appropriately. Test question. Constantly evaluating your verbal and nonverbal communication, as well as the verbal and nonverbal communication of the people you are interacting with, is important to your job and safety. What is important to your job and safety? Constantly evaluating verbal and nonverbal communication. All right. So then, here's an example. You may observe that a person's verbal communication, which is what they say with their words, during a traffic stop seems unemotional, but their nonverbal communication seems aggressive. So again, verbal communication is what they say with words, where nonverbal communication is any message or signal sent from one person to another without the explicit use of language. So nonverbal is basically everything but words. So it is body motion, it is hand gestures, it is facial gestures, it is if they're stepping forward, stepping backward, clenching their fists. Well, we get to some cues here, but they could ask a test question saying, hey, if someone is clenching their fist and stepping towards you, acting aggressive, is that verbal communication or nonverbal? So just know the difference between the two. Okay, so some communication cues include voice and tone. Okay, so these are communication cues, know them. So you have voice and tone, general appearance and dress, posture, body movement, facial expressions, touch, smell, personal space, eye contact, and break of gaze. Okay, so that's all of them. So it's about 2 pages worth, so we're going to go through those real quick here. So these are communication cues. So test question could be, which of the following are communication cues? It could be all the above, it could be voice and tone, it could be none of the above, test questions like that. So voice and tone. Verbal communication is not just what we say, but how we say it. Pay attention to how you speak and be mindful of your volume, tone, and inflection. Ask yourself and anyone else in the conversation these questions. What is the tone, volume, and pitch of the speaker? Does the speaker's tone of voice indicate sarcasm, confidence, compassion, anger, or another emotion? What words are being used and how are they spoken? Those are all voice and tone. Now we have general appearance and dress. Whether we recognize it or not, all of us make judgments based on a person's appearance. However, it is important to stay objective regarding a person's way of dressing. Posture. Posture is how we carry ourselves and can be important nonverbal communication. So if they ask which of these is important nonverbal communication, it is posture. Posture refers to the way we sit, walk, and stand and includes our bearing, subtle movements, and general presence. When evaluating someone's posture, consider the following. When you ask someone about their timeline on the date of the crime, does the person shift their weight or suddenly cross their arms? Does someone's nonverbal communication match what they are saying to you? Does a person's posture help validate or contradict what they say? Body movement. This can offer vital nonverbal cues. We often use our bodies to communicate our attitude or our emotional state by facing or leaning towards a person or moving away from a person. Consider the following. When you interview someone, what is your body language saying? Do you lean forward to indicate interest? Does the person you are talking to exhibit physical indicators, including rocking back and forth, twitching their eyes, or shaking their legs? These behaviors could indicate that the person is nervous and is trying to self-soothe, or could be indicators of fight or flight. I do recall a test question being a little confusing on this, basically saying, if someone is twitching their eyes and shaking their legs, this 100% indicates that the person is lying. The answer is obviously not true. These are behaviors that could indicate that they are either nervous or lying, but they're not obsolete because certain people have certain twitches that maybe they do all the time. So remember, when it comes to body movement, that is facing or leaning towards a person or away from a person, and I guess body movement. It sounds simple, but in the test, you're going to think about body movement versus posture. Posture is sitting, walking, standing, subtle movements, and general presence. Think about how similar that is to body movement, which is facing away, leaning towards. It is twitching, shaking their legs, rocking back and forth. That sounds a lot like posture because we're talking about sitting, we're talking about subtle movements, but just know the difference. Posture is sit, walk, and stand, subtle movements, and general presence, where body movement is rocking back and forth, shaking their legs, twitching their eyes, leaning in, leaning away. Okay? Facial expressions. We're able to express various emotions through our facial expressions without saying a word. The good thing is that most facial expressions are universal. For example, the facial expression for sorrow, joy, surprise, rage, disgust, and terror are the same across most cultures. When communicating with others, listen attentively and ask yourself, what facial expression is this person making, and does it provide additional information? Does the person's facial expression match the verbal message they are sending? A person may tell you that they are fine, but their facial expression may be one of rage. Then we have touch. Nonverbal behavior regarding touch also depends on the person. You may find yourself having to touch people to perform your duties. For example, when consoling a victim, you may give a reassuring pat on the shoulder to show empathy, or you may have to physically redirect someone to a particular location. So a test question I remember was simply saying, when consoling a victim, you have to give a reassuring pat on the shoulder to show empathy. What type of communication cue is this? Touch, right? So it might be if someone is leaning in to show interest in what you're talking about, what communication cue is this? That is body movement. If someone is saying that they're making subtle movements or making general presence as a whole, that would be posture. So then we move into smell. This sense can sometimes be a barrier to communication. So, test question here. If they ask what sense can be a barrier to communication, you have a couple senses here. You have sight, smell, touch, but this sense in particular can be a barrier to communication. For example, some people may not share your expectations of personal hygiene. They may have a medical condition or may have dietary restrictions that cause them to smell differently. Avoid making judgments about the people with whom you interact. Personal space. Boundaries vary greatly from person to person. While it may be acceptable in some cultures to move into close proximity to communicate, it may not be in others. Be mindful that when you move within someone's personal space, you may make them uncomfortable and limit your ability to communicate with them. So, test question here. It might say, some cultures, it is acceptable to be in close proximity when communicating. What communication cue is this? And that is personal space. But that could sound like body movement. That could sound like posture, right? Posture, you're standing close. Just remember, you need to know these examples and definitions. It seems easy when reading it, but when you have the test in front of you, it's not always as easy. Alright, then we have eye contact. Your ability to establish, maintain, and understand eye contact will enhance your ability to communicate effectively. Test question. What will enhance your ability to communicate effectively? What communication cue will enhance your ability to communicate effectively? Technically, all of these communication cues are the right answer. All of these have some way of helping you to communicate effectively, but for some reason, eye contact happens to just be the one they say it under. So, again, an example of why it can be confusing on this test. So, again, eye contact, it enhances your ability to communicate effectively. Factors such as cultural background, personality, nervous tension, emotional state, and medical conditions can influence someone's eye contact. Again, that one doesn't sound as easy as it is. What are things that can influence someone's eye contact? Their cultural background, their personality, their emotional state, etc. Use your knowledge of eye contact to help determine someone's emotional state. So again, which communication cue can help determine someone's emotional state? Eye contact. So I just gave you 3 questions for eye contact alone. So they could give you all of them, one of them, 2 of them. 2 concepts that you should be aware of are mutual gaze and break of gaze. Test questions, know these. Mutual gaze is the common level of eye-to-eye contact that 2 people have when conversing. Okay? It usually starts when someone is trying to get someone else's attention. For example, as an officer interviewing a subject who appears hesitant to reveal information, you might establish mutual gaze by nodding your head and maintaining eye contact to encourage the subject to continue to talk. A break of gaze usually occurs when a person unintentionally or intentionally drops their gaze from the person looking at them. This can be caused by personality, emotional state, traumatic event, cultural norms, or just recalling information. If a person breaks their gaze, it may indicate any number of emotions or nonverbal messages. Do not be quick to assume that you understand the response if they are not making eye contact with you. So, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. which is, if they give you an ultimatum, meaning, if they did a break of gaze, that means they're lying. No. Okay? There could be a multitude of nonverbal messages on why they are not, right? Exactly. It could be cultural norms. They're not supposed to look you in the eye. They just look down because they're trying to remember a situation, etc. Effectively evaluating your verbal and nonverbal communication will prove useful when you have to conduct criminal investigations, interviews, traffic stops, and interrogations. What will prove useful when you have to conduct these investigations? Effectively evaluating your verbal and nonverbal communication. As a general rule, evaluate verbal and nonverbal behaviors within the entire context of what is going on and take cultural factors into consideration. All communication is subject to misinterpretation because people may react differently in stressful situations. Possible test questions. All communication is subject to misinterpretation. Challenges to effective communication. Anticipating potential conflict will help you prepare for any law enforcement duty. There are many verbal and nonverbal cues to be mindful of as situations unfold, but there are strategies for conflict management that can be tailored to your duties. Each situation is unique and should be approached with patience and empathy. There are some common verbal and nonverbal barriers that you should try to avoid when communicating. All right, so these will be on the test, probably a mix or combination of, or single options. So try to know them. I would use common sense and logic when answering because it may be hard to memorize them all. There's, I think, 10 here. So these are common verbal and nonverbal barriers. Failing to explain your actions, failing to listen to what the person has to say, using dialect slang words that have multiple meanings or different languages, using curse words or slurs, phrasing your message in a disrespectful way, having prejudice or implicit bias that lead to false assumptions or stereotyping, changing body language or tone abruptly, using nonverbal communication that does not match your verbal communication, using derogatory hand gestures or body movements. And it is important to avoid barriers to effective communication, but you should be especially mindful of these barriers when a person has physical or psychological disabilities or conditions. For example, speaking louder for someone who may be hard of hearing. A person has a language difference or an accent. Environmental and situational distractions are present, such as background noise in a person's home, like a crying child or loud radio. So these are important barriers to these are going to be confusing here, so let me explain this as best as possible. So the test question might ask, what are common verbal and nonverbal barriers? The 10 I gave you above, curse words, disrespectful, non-explaining, those are common verbal and nonverbal barriers, where barriers to avoid for effective communication are the 3 I just listed here, such as child crying in the background, someone having an accent, or someone hard of hearing. Those are important barriers to avoid to effective communication. So the test question probably reads something along the lines of, if a person has a language different or an accent, is this a common verbal and nonverbal barrier, or is this an important barrier to avoid to effective communication? So you see how they're kind of similar and they could be confused. Know those two separately. And there are several ways to prevent communication, common barriers to communication. So you need to memorize these as well. These will be on the test. So there are several ways to, you have your barriers, okay? You have your common verbal and nonverbal barriers, and then you have your barriers to effective communication, and then you have your preventing common barriers to communication. So treat everyone with respect. So these are just the opposite of the verbal and nonverbal barriers. So treat everyone with respect, maintain appropriate eye contact, keep sentences brief and to the point, give clear, specific directions. For example, stand next to the trunk or move over. Well, stand next to the trunk is better than saying move over to where I can see you. So a test question could have those two examples and say which one is a good way to prevent common barrier to communication. And you would say the clear, direct directions. So use open-ended questions to promote communication without limiting the other person's response to short or one-word answers. Avoid asking yes or no questions. Allow the person to give their side of the story. Understand that there will be times when communication barriers will be beyond your control. However, using the communication strategies above may help reduce the frequency of these occurrences. Managing conflict. Officers frequently serve as mediators during a conflict, and conflict resolution is a part of either temporarily or permanently resolving a situation before it escalates. Properly managing conflict can increase the awareness and understanding of the people involved and help them accept a decision or outcome. Common calls for service may often involve you mediating between juveniles and their parents or caregivers. The following conflict resolution strategies may be used for both adults and juveniles by tailoring your approach to each individual situation. Separating the people involved, render first aid, gather information from all sides, when appropriate, explain what you're doing, provide options and resources, help mediate a compromise, tell the people involved why you are or are not taking action, act with dignity and leave people with their dignity intact. So an example of managing conflict would be to tell the people involved why you are or are not taking action. Example of a test question. Before you begin mediating, you will also need to determine if the conflict can be resolved or only managed. Know the resources available to manage the conflict and bring it to the appropriate conclusion. Establishing order by guiding the people involved in the dispute towards a peaceful end should be the main goal. So again, the main goal is establishing order by guiding people involved to an agreement. However, keep in mind that not everyone may agree with the solution. To manage conflicts effectively, you should employ active listening, understand human and cultural diversity, and practice self-control. Okay, how do we manage conflicts effectively? Active listening, understanding human and cultural diversity, and practicing self-control. You will learn about active listening later in this chapter. It is equally important to be well informed of the law and your authority, as well as how to appropriately apply both to a situation. You should remain unbiased and calm when helping people with a dispute. Many situations have the potential to escalate to violence if not properly managed. Okay. Unfortunately, not all conflicts can be brought to a peaceful solution. Community expectations. As an officer, it is important to become familiar with your community and its expectations. Community refers to the people and locations that make up the neighborhoods, institutions, and businesses in the area where you work. So again, test question, community, people and locations that make up the neighborhood, institutions, and businesses in the area where you work. Okay. When officers act professionally, they build trust and strengthen law enforcement officers' relationship with the community, and the community is more secure and protected from criminal elements. This is why displaying professional behavior when interacting with the community is as important as demonstrating proficiency with firearms or defensive tactics. On the other hand, behaving unprofessionally will have an adverse effect on how the community views law enforcement and can impact everyone's safety. So what can impact everyone's safety and the community view of law enforcement? That is behaving unprofessionally. Okay. Make sure to always demonstrate professionalism in your actions. Demonstrating professionalism will help improve your communication with the general public and the community and make you more capable of carrying out your duties. Remember that you will need the community's respect, support, and cooperation to provide effective law enforcement encounters. Okay. Community demographics. During the course of your duties as an officer, you will meet people from different countries and cultural groups, and you will communicate with people from various socio-economic backgrounds, ages, physical abilities, religious beliefs, living situations, sexual orientations, political beliefs, and ideologies. Okay. To improve your communication with diverse communities, learn the demographics and social characteristics of your community, and demonstrate a sincere willingness to learn about those you serve. Intercultural communication. Culture is one of many factors that affect communication. Culture may be identified as the customary beliefs, social norms, and significant traits prevalent among a group of people in a particular place. Intercultural communication takes place when people from different cultures communicate. So again, intercultural are different cultures communicating with each other. Intercultural can mean interethnic, interreligious, and interregional, as well as between genders. So two genders speaking to each other would be intercultural communication. When intercultural communication is done poorly, it can result in miscommunication and division between you and your community. When you are culturally responsive, bold question here, You are open to learning about new cultures, are respectful of cultural differences, and recognizing the important role that culture plays in people's lives. Okay, so make sure to learn your community's diverse populations, faith organization, languages, small businesses, etc. Make sure to demonstrate respect for the cultures of your community members. Make sure to be open to learning and fixing mistakes when they happen. And remember that not everyone has the same experience as you. Okay, preparing for an interaction. There are several techniques that can help you mentally prepare for the possible interactions you may have while on your way to a call or before a conversation. Some rely on self-talk and some employ self-awareness. Okay, lost my spot here. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so self-talk is the practice of talking to yourself as you anticipate, encounter, or evaluate an event. Test question. Examples include recalling skills and information learned during training, applying agency policies and procedures, and visualizing a professional response. So that's how the test question read for us. Recalling skills and information learned during training is an example of what? Self-talk. So it's not self-awareness, it's not professionalism, it's not any of those other ones. Okay? Visualizing the conversation can help you remain objective in a difficult situation by keeping your thoughts, verbal and nonverbal communications, and emotional responses in check. So again, visualizing the conversation helps you remain objective in your situation. To communicate effectively, you must control your emotions and not allow them to dictate your words or actions. Be the calming presence and do not allow your anger to escalate a situation. Hostility and rudeness have no place in an officer's relationship with the community. Core competencies. Every officer should demonstrate the following 10 core communication competencies while performing their duties. These competencies will help you communicate and may also help you avoid volatile situations. So remember the 10 here. First one is introduction. The simple act of introducing yourself. Appropriate question. Asking the right questions can help make the communication process smoother. These 10, you'll probably have at least 5 or 7 of them be test questions. So you need to learn them all. They're usually pretty easy. So it'll ask, hey, the simple act of introducing yourself is what? Introduction, right? Asking the right questions to make communication smoother is what? Appropriate questions. Self-explanatory. Then we have active listening. These are critical, and it involves paraphrasing or restating the information, summarizing or repeating several of the major points, clarifying or asking the person to explain or to repeat, reflecting by stating the information in a way that allows the person speaking to know that you are not only understand what they said, but also recognize their feelings and emotions, and ensuring that you allow adequate time for the person to both comprehend what you said and be able to respond to you. So remember, active listening is definitely going to be in the test, and it's going to be the more confusing one, but active listening includes paraphrasing, summarizing, clarifying, reflecting, and ensuring adequate time. Make sure you know the difference between paraphrasing and summarizing, because that will most likely be on the test. So summarizing is summing up what the person said so you understand everything correctly, and paraphrasing is, okay, so I understand what you're saying, it is this. So paraphrasing is understanding, summarizing is repeating. So summarize is repeating, paraphrasing is understanding. Active listening involves focusing more on listening than talking. So I know our test had, I think, 3 or 4 questions on active listening alone. So this could be one of them here. Listen so that you can gather important information such as who, what, when, where, and why, and how, and listening will also help you communicate better when you need to speak. Self-de-escalation. If you find yourself becoming angry or emotional, take time to pause and reset your response. Okay, you may need to have a fellow officer relieve you. Remember that people talking a certain way is not an attack on you as a person, but law enforcement in general. Make sure you understand what triggers you and your emotions and learn ways to manage them. Knowing and overcoming your weaknesses will help you gain self-control when presented with a stressful situation. So breathing smoothly, exercising self-control, professional attitude, impartial outlook, etc. Your goal is to have a positive result with the community. Nonverbal communication. Understanding the subtle differences between a person's spoken words and their nonverbal communication will improve your ability to communicate effectively. One of the things that makes communication so powerful is not only what is expressed, but how is it expressed. Alright, so nonverbal communication could be nodding, confirming, extending your arm, holding your hand out, emphasizing commands such as pointing, directions, etc. Environment and audience consideration. You must treat everyone with dignity and respect, so be mindful with whom and where you are speaking and remain empathetic and culturally responsive. If someone does not speak your language or is hearing impaired, be patient and attempt to provide that person with an interpreter. Implicit bias. Always take a moment to assess what implicit biases might influence a given situation. Self-awareness. Remember, these are part of the 10 core competencies. Self-awareness. Being aware of your own thoughts and behaviors can help you control yourself in a difficult situation. And procedural justice. So again, lead framework, explain, giving them a chance to talk, treating people with respect, and remaining transparent. And then appropriate conclusion. At the end of any interaction with a person, whether law enforcement action is taken or not, conclude by explaining what actions will or will not be taken and why. As explained earlier, treat every person with respect and leave them with their dignity intact. So that concludes Chapter 2 here. That was a little more lengthy than I expected at 41 minutes. But I do believe it was necessary for this chapter, as you've seen how many test questions I recalled just from reading the material. I probably provided anywhere from 30 to 50 different test question options here, which should basically summarize your test. So take everything there that I read to you, go through it, have flashcards, practice tests, read the book, listen to this, get a lot of study in. Good luck on this chapter. Make sure to stay focused and don't get caught up on the little inconsistencies of, this. Just remember that there are a lot of terms with similar definitions. Try to remember that one definition that sticks particularly to that term, and that should help you through this chapter. Good luck. You guys got this. Signing off.